morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. The Tories and Labour have wrecked the public finances. Reform UK will restore them. For decades now, the Tories and Labour have suffocated the British economy, wasted billions of pounds every year prioritising foreign citizens, giving us the most expensive energy costs in the world, and raising tax as a percentage of GDP in this country to the highest levels since World War II. Let's talk about the Tory record. They claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, the ones who help us live within our means. They managed to run a deficit in every single one of their 14 years in power. They managed to triple the national debt and make everyone miserable in the process. And they blew up people's mortgages for good measure. Labour are just as bad. According to Capital Economics, Rachel Reeves is raising taxes on British people, post the budget that's coming, at a faster rate than any Chancellor in 55 years. Unemployment in this country is already at a 4-year high and trending higher, and that's to say nothing of the millions who are not in that number because they're not actively seeking work. And inflation remains sticky at 3.8%, well above the target rate for the Bank of England, which is why so many in this country are struggling with the cost of living. The cost of living is intolerable. The prices in the supermarket seem to go up seemingly on a weekly basis. We have rents going up all the time. Mortgages never seem to get any cheaper, and don't even get us started on energy bills, which people are petrified to even open. And speaking of energy, this country has the highest industrial energy costs in the world. There is not an example on the planet of a high-growth economy with the kind of energy prices Britain has, nor have there ever been, nor will there ever be. So, the political class are running this country's economy off a cliff. Britain is headed for economic catastrophe unless we urgently change course. And that's not just me or Nigel saying that. The warning lights in terms of sovereign debt are already sounding and are already flashing, and the alarms are sounding. The 30-year borrowing costs for the United Kingdom in terms of gilts are already not far off multi-decade highs, and seemingly every week we hear of another global multinational that is pulling investments from the UK. As Prime Minister, Nigel Farage will restore the public finances and restore and revive confidence in the United Kingdom. You know, despite the best efforts of the political class, we still have an awful lot going for us in this country. 3 of the top 10 universities on the planet are here on these little islands. We have more than our fair share of brilliant people in this new era. We also have millions upon millions of strivers and grafters, men and women who set their alarm clocks before they go to bed and rise early in the morning to go to work. And I promise you this, as Prime Minister, Nigel Farage will be their champion. So, without further ado, please let me introduce you to the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Zia, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Another depressing budget hoves into view, another tax-raising budget, another budget that doesn't have the courage, the guts to cut public spending, and I think the level of pessimism amongst businesses, amongst savers, amongst those that have assets of any kind has not been lower in modern times. I think for some years we've actually been living under an illusion we've not been prepared to face up to just how much of an economic mess we're genuinely in. As we slip down the global league tables, we kid ourselves. Well, it's okay. We've got GDP growth. But there wouldn't have been any GDP growth over the course of the last few years if it wasn't for mass migration on a scale hitherto never even contemplated, and, of course, excess government borrowing. That is all that has kept GDP figures up. And indeed, I think we can argue very strongly that on an individual basis, mass migration has made the average Briton poorer. You take a year like 2024, a record level of people coming into the country, and GDP per capita falling. And of course, the productivity problem, well, there's nothing new there. We've been suffering from poor productivity going back for the best part of 20 years. We convinced ourselves that by importing masses of cheap, unskilled foreign labour, that somehow that would be good for our economy. Well, it was good for the wage bills of big companies in the short term, but catastrophic when it came to training and education for our own workforce. And when it comes to the public sector, who still seem to be hooked on the idea that working from home somehow is good for productivity, well, we see the disastrous results, and this is something that Danny Kruger, on our behalf, has started work on already. But the one subject we really don't discuss, at least the Conservative and Labour parties don't discuss, is the level of national debt. In fact, even last week, the leader of the Conservative Party was saying, in office, we cut the deficit for 14 years. Well, cutting the deficit is a very different thing to cutting debt when you're still running borrowing certainly at peacetime levels, unlike anything ever seen before. They may try to wash their hands and run away from it, but our national debt increased by over 2.5 times during those 14 years. And now it's accelerating. Now it's accelerating in the most extraordinary way. The OBR predictions for the year going back just before the general election was that we'd borrow 77 billion in the year. That estimate is now 130 billion and rising with each and every month. Our debt has risen faster than any other comparable Western country. In fact, in the last 20 years, our debt-GDP ratio is up by nearly 60%. We are doing worse on debt than any of our competitors, and that includes Eurozone countries who are in other deep, deep trouble. Our debt repayments are over 100 billion a year. They're over the level of our defence budget, and the markets are getting nervy. We've seen this with 10 and 30-year gilt yields. In fact, I think my own view is that in 2 budgets' time, the markets will actually force the Chancellor into what will be a genuine austerity budget, at which point the left in the Labour Party won't buy it, and it's why I still stand by my prediction that there will be a general election caused by economic collapse that will happen in 2027. And just look at the pace, the rapid pace that we continue to deindustrialise. It's all going. Chemicals, refining, cement, heavy engineering, steel. We're losing literally all of it. Cars, and China, the beneficiary in almost every single sector. Why? Because for ideological reasons, we have chosen to have the most expensive industrial energy prices in the world. As for benefits, well, the bill this year has ballooned to over 300 billion. That is more than the cost of the National Health Service and defence added up together. So things aren't happening, and work isn't even paying. Our million lowest paid workers would all be better off if they claimed to have mild anxiety. That is the level of mess we're in. One of my own great frustrations is that Brexit has been squandered. The opportunity to sensibly deregulate, the opportunity to become competitive globally, all of that has been squandered. And the worst thing is that regulations and the way regulators behave with British business is now worse than it was at the time of the Brexit referendum vote, and I apply that with knowledge from everything through the financial services industry to the fishing industry. Now, we believe that the fundamental problem behind so much of this, and yes, of course, there are global trends, yes, of course, these things are factors, but that there is a fundamental problem at the heart of the way this country is run. It's the people that are actually doing it. We're run by a group of human rights lawyers, not entrepreneurs. Virtually nobody on the front bench has ever taken a risk, ever borrowed money, ever set up a business, ever had to meet that monthly or weekly, depending what you do, payroll. There is no understanding at all the disconnect between the conversations in Westminster and, frankly, in much of the media too, and what is happening in the real economy is a gaping chasm. Well, I have to tell you, it's even worse when you think about who runs the departments. Oh, let's put a minister in charge of railways, shall we? They can oversee HS2. They've never worked in railways. They've no knowledge of railways. They haven't got a clue what they're doing. And yet, we managed to have 18 rail ministers in the space of 14 years. And this applies in department after department. People whose only qualification is to be a member of Parliament. As if that's enough. As if that's enough to give a lead, to give a guide over all the things that really matter in our life. Now, if we had a Parliament made up of more experienced people from a broader range of life, that may be okay. But the current convention that both parties stick with just simply doesn't work. In fact, frankly, you think about it, it really is a farce, isn't it? You're put in charge of a big department, and then after 14 months, when you've just about got your feet under the table, Keir Starmer, or whoever else it might be, decides to reshuffle you. And so my promise is that reform will not just think differently, but reform will do differently. We will sweep away these outdated conventions. We will become the most pro-business, pro-entrepreneurship government that has been seen in this country in modern times. We'll bring into government, as advisors or ministers, people with real business expertise in their own sector. And we will signal what we hope and believe and what we know we need to be a change of attitude in this country. A change of attitude towards hard work. A change of attitude towards making money. A change of attitude towards success. And I would like to think this would begin in our schools, that we'd have more national champions, that we'd take people who'd come from nothing and become successes and make them heroes, make them role models for younger people to follow. Because believe me, that is very, very badly needed indeed. And perhaps it's appropriate that this speech is being given in this magnificent old banking hall right here in the heart of the City of London. Now, it's a place that I know incredibly well, having spent much of my working life here, and generations of my family before me that worked here. It is a very special place because it symbolises what is still, despite everything, Britain's biggest industry. We never talk about it. Parliament rarely debates it. Financial services are Britain's biggest industry. But what sad decline we are currently in. We have an EU rule book that is almost entirely in place. And that is interpreted by massively overzealous regulation. The costs of doing business in London, the costs of doing business in our financial services industry are now simply too high. And we're losing business to places all over the world, New York, the Far East, you name it. There is, of course, one booming sector here, though. That is HR and compliance. And Richard Tice and I were talking about this earlier. The FCA now incredibly have 5,000 staff. It was 2,000 staff when I left the city just over 20 years ago. And still we carry on with our outdated practices. We still have stamp duty on share transactions and wonder why IPOs and stock trading in London is in such serious state. We have an FCA keen now to push a diversity agenda, as if diversity in the city is what matters. Well, when I worked here, it didn't matter what religion you were. It didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter what class you were. It didn't matter what colour you were. When I worked in the city, it was based on, are you good enough? It was based on being a meritocracy. And that coincided, I think, with London being at the most dominant position in financial services that it's been certainly in modern times. And then we have the banking industry. Not necessarily always been my favourites over the course of the last few years. But they, of course, are forced to implement 4 major European Union money laundering directives. All, of course, put in place with the very, very best of intentions, but that has led to the debanking of hundreds of thousands of individuals and tens of thousands of businesses across this country through no fault of their own, at the same time as the Turkish barbershops proliferate along with the cash car washes right across our country. Our regulators are using sledgehammers to miss the nut. It's just not working. And with the banks not able to act as they should, it's led to the growth of secondary lending, that market exploding, and something which I predict will come back to bite us very, very hard, as it did decades ago. And we've totally ignored the whole new world out there. Folks, it's happening. We're being left behind. There's a global boom in the trade in digital assets, in the use of stable coins, in the usage and investment in all forms of cryptocurrency. We've literally turned our backs on it, both the Bank of England and the FCA being guilty of this. The reason the city succeeded for hundreds of years is that it innovated, it took risk, it saw what the future direction of markets and consumer and customer and commercial demand would be. And we have done absolutely none of it. And frankly, I believe it's a disaster. We should be leading the world in these 21st century businesses. So our aim would be to sensibly deregulate a rule book that was written for the European Union, not written for the City of London, to think globally and to have a much more open debate with the Bank of England. It seems that Parliament thinks, oh, the Bank of England have got independence. Well, they've got independence over monetary policy. They don't have independence over fiscal policy. And it was Richard Tice that pointed out 18 months ago the vast sums of money unnecessarily being paid in interest to banks. And now we've moved to quantitative tightening. Well, they're on course to lock in losses of £150 billion. This has a major fiscal impact on this country. I haven't heard Rachel Reeves talk about it once, which, given she was 10 years a very senior economist over there, I must say I find very, very surprising, and a total rethink of what the FCA is. Markets need sensible regulation that users can trust. And you know something? They don't need a whole lot more than that. And don't forget, when I talk about the city, I'm not just talking about here and Canary Wharf. I'm not just talking about Mayfair. I'm not just talking about a few very high earners. I'm talking about an industry that employs hundreds and thousands of people in every major town and every major city in this country. That is how fundamentally important it is. The whole economy must encourage innovation. We must encourage ambition and, yes, dare I say it, risk-taking. Free markets work because people take risks. And if it goes wrong, it's not the job of governments to bail them out. It's the job of their shareholders and their bondholders to lose all of their stake. And we need so much more than that. But to be that kind of economy, we have to have the right people in our country. That breed of people that will take astonishing risk. That breed of people who'll give up their lives dedicated to a particular project that they wish to succeed. And the numbers on that aren't looking very good. The exodus is real. An estimated 16,500 very rich people will leave this country this year. But a total of about 80,000 people will leave this year seeking jobs, seeking work, seeking opportunity elsewhere around the world. And yes, many of our brightest, youngest, most ambitious people have simply had enough. We're living through a wealth drain, but we're also living again through a late 1970s style brain drain. And we intend to reverse all of that. The and this is unpopular. You talk about this, oh, you can't just talk about rich people. Well, I'll tell you in a moment why we need to. The non-dom tax changes started, of course, by George Osborne, accelerated by Jeremy Hunt, finished off by Rachel Reeves, is a self-induced act of financial stupidity. These people pay their UK taxes. These people employ a lot of people. These people invest in British businesses and British industries. These people are the biggest spenders in the country. But off they go. Milan welcomes them with open arms, as has Lisbon over the course of the last few years. Athens now doing the same. Dubai, a 250,000 Britons. 250,000 Britons now living in Dubai alone. And that's why we've introduced the idea of the Britannia card. A one-off payment for non-doms to come back, settle here, and pay all the relevant tax on their UK income. The same is true of those that are wealthy with assets. They're fleeing. They're scared of wealth taxes. But what they're even more scared of is retrospective tax changes. And it's happened. All through the 90s, I ran my own company. I put money aside every year. I didn't take the family to Barbados. I didn't buy the kind of cars I'd have liked. I put money aside. I thought, well, that's there for a pension, and if I snuff it, it's there for the family. That is now subject to inheritance tax. People are scared of retrospective taxation, and even scared now of the idea of an exit tax. But perhaps the biggest disaster are young professionals who are caught in the £100,000 a year tax trap, and young entrepreneurs who want to get on. They're leaving, and we want them back in this country. And this hard left socialist dogma that it's popular to tax the rich, that the rich won't move, they'll stay and pay more, that, I'm afraid, has infected virtually the entirety of our political class, and it's wrong. So let me make it clear. I want as many high-earning people as possible living in this country and paying as much tax as they legally have to. Because if the rich leave and the rich don't pay tax, then the poorer in society will all have to pay more tax. It's as simple as that, and what we're doing is crazy. And we need those people back, although I have to accept that coming back into London will need not just sensible tax rates, not just a government they fear, it'll need law and order on London's streets to be sorted out, something that Mayor Khan appears to be oblivious to, but is given by some now as another reason for leaving. London, the capital city of Britain, in which you're too scared to wear a watch walking down the street. Right at the heart of what we intend to do to reindustrialise Britain, using the fact we have rather greater knowledge, and we're not stuck to dogma in a way the other parties were, has to be to deal with the energy industry. It's as if a new religion overtook the Commons in Blair's time. It was reinforced by Call Me Dave, Vote Blue, Go Green. We then saw Theresa May put net zero into law without even having a vote on the floor of the House of Commons. It wasn't needed because everybody agreed. And now, of course, we have Ed Miliband, whose fanaticism has taken things to a whole new level. Well, he's in competition with Boris, who wanted us to be the Saudi Arabia of wind. Somehow they all seem to think they're saving the planet. The truth is, what they're actually doing is they are exporting carbon dioxide emissions to manufacturers in companies that operate under lower environmental standards. And just look what it's done to the price. And you'll hear evasion after evasion about the genuine cost of renewable, intermittent, unreliable, renewable energy. But our electricity prices are 4 times that of the United States of America, double that of most of our European competitors. And we've done this to ourselves. It is complete and utter madness. You can have as much solar and as much wind as you want. But frankly, the grid that we have, without spending 2 to 3 trillion pounds updating it, cannot cope with that intermittent energy, which is why we now pay wind turbines to turn off when there is too much wind. The lunatic cost of net zero is continuing deindustrialisation. 3 or 4 more years of this, there'll be very little manufacturing left in Britain at all, believe me. And when you think about it, it's really quite mad, isn't it? Because we're not just seeing the closure of our refineries and everybody else, who, for many cases, energy contributes 40% of their overall bill. But we're even conning ourselves now. The Prime Minister talks about AI. We're going to be an AI centre. Oh, no, we're not. Because the new energies, the new industries, use more energy than the old, heavy manufacturing industries. If we want to be involved with data centres, with crypto, we're going to need to use more energy than we've ever done before. And even with this massive amount of expenditure that we've put through subsidy and much else into wind, for example, there were days in January this year when we were importing 25% of our energy, and it was coming from Norway, across the other side of the North Sea, and it was coming from Belgium and from Holland. At some point on the current course, energy won't just be expensive, but the lights actually will go out. So we will scrap all net zero subsidies. We will bring down the cost of energy. We will get rid of the insane North Sea taxes put on by Jeremy Hunt and then a bit added on the top by Rachel Reeves. Let's get the North Sea operating. Let's have a look at some of the new onshore gas fields that have been found in this country. That will produce tens of thousands of well-paid jobs. And we've given notice already to the renewables industry that the current insane AR7 round of wind auctions, where it would appear that Ed Miliband is happy to lock in for the next 20 years prices that are 30, maybe 40 or 50% higher than the current already exorbitant price. We've given notice to those companies that if we're in government, we will scrap those contracts. Longer term, we believe as a party in nuclear energy, but not the way the current non-businessmen and women in government and our administrations administer it. Just have a look at Sizewell, have a look at Hinkley Point, have a look at ballooning cost, have a look at time delay, and look to South Korea. South Korea do nuclear energy with no concessions to safety at 25% of the cost that the British do. Yes, there'll be obstacles with planning and much else, but we absolutely have to do this for our future. Our current politicians are not good enough. Our current politicians don't understand business. Our current politicians don't understand money. Just look at the continuing farce of HS2 to understand just how useless they really are. And we will, if we win that next election, bring in seasoned professionals, good not just at managing money, but with expertise in their own industry. We will bring in private sector specialist knowledge. Of that, there is no question. And generally on business, and I saw this in Brussels, and I'm seeing this too in Westminster, that government only listens to big business. It only listens, in fact, in most cases, to multinationals that aren't really British companies at all. They're the ones that have the ear of business. I guess they're the ones that provide the tickets for Wimbledon, the dinners, and all the rest of it. There is a huge ignored sector in this country, a sector who are the genuine engine for growth in the UK economy, a sector we cannot do without if we're to turn round the current dismal state of the British economy. They are rarely talked about. They are ignored, but they are put upon. Just think of the 30% increase that Mr Hunt brought in for corporation tax, stifling reinvestment. Just think of this government saying their annual returns now must be quarterly returns with added bureaucracy and added costs. Yet the completely forgotten part of the British economy are the 5.6 million men and women that run small businesses, act as directors, or organise their lives as sole traders. They feel unwanted in almost every single way, and yet they're really important. 60% of employment in the private sector is provided by those 5.6 million small companies. They've been hammered by national insurance rules over the course of the last year, especially those working in hospitality and sectors such as that. And they are embattled by IR35 regulations designed by the Treasury and weak Conservative chancellors who assume that everyone out there who isn't working for a big firm is some kind of crook. Well, I'm sorry, but the IR35 rules are ridiculous. They're stifling innovation. They even drive some in their 50s just to throw their hands up and go into early retirement. We will be the party of small business. We will be the party of risk takers. And look, there is a fundamental, I think, misunderstanding in many, many ways about what business really is. It's as if, well, you're either for business in politics or you're for the worker in politics. It is a fundamental misunderstanding, frankly, at every level. Thriving businesses are good for their employees. And something that I don't think anybody on the front benches would even understand is that small businesses very often treat their employees as well as they would treat their own family. You know, I went through times of having to pay monthly payroll when my staff were earning a lot more than I was. But I wouldn't for a minute want to jettison any single one of them, but hold tight and wait for better times. And we are on the side of working people. We are the party of Alarm Clock Britain. And we want people who are out there working to be genuinely better off working than they are on a whole range of benefits. And it's perhaps on benefits as much as anything else that I was keen to do this speech today. There seem to have been several misunderstandings as to where Reform stands on benefits, as if we are the party that will throw around the money like confetti, based, I think, around my comments on the two-child cap and removing it. Now, no one actually listened to what I said. I mean, this happens, I know. But what I said was we should remove the two-child cap for British working couples. And what I meant by that is for lower-paid couples who are both working, the cost of childcare is exorbitant. It's a disincentive for having more children. It's a disincentive for going out to work. And so I thought a tax credit for a couple where both were working was actually a very, very pro-family policy in every single way. We have already announced cuts to welfare spending, but no one seems to have noticed. So let me use this opportunity to reiterate where we are this morning. My colleague Lee Anderson and Zia Youssef did a press conference earlier on this week dealing specifically with PIP claims, saying that we would take away claims from people who were on PIP for non-major anxiety. That policy alone, given the daily, weekly, monthly rate of new sign-ons, that policy alone would save us $9 billion a year by 2029 under current predictions. And in fact, all disability claims will have to be dealt with in person. All disability claims will have to be reassessed. There'll be no more Zoom, 5 or 10 minutes on a Zoom and be signed off with some sort of malady. And there'll be no more family GP feeling pressured into signing people off. It'll all be done by independent third party. And you don't think this matters? Well, just think about this. There has been a 50% increase in disability claims in Britain over the course of the last 5 years. We are over-diagnosing many of these things, and in doing so, throwing young British people onto a scrap heap marked victim and replacing what they could be doing by cheap imported foreign labour. It is madness, and I would further point to the Boris wave. Indefinite leave to remain that begins to kick in very, very shortly for 1 million or more people who are in this country who will be able to claim benefits for the whole of their lives and to bring in dependents as well. There are some think tanks that estimate this particular cohort could cost up to £200 billion over the course of their lifetime. So in terms of benefit cuts, I think we've just proposed the biggest benefit cuts you've probably ever heard any government do, and I will make this absolute promise. We will substantially cut the benefits bill. We will reduce the size of the public sector. We will look, as we've already started, at public sector pensions, which are a massive liability, and from the early work that Richard has done, we can see these funds are paying fees that are way out of line for what should be appropriate and being badly mismanaged. On the cost of living, we will cut people's energy bills. Now, Keir Starmer said he'd cut them by £300. They're up £285. And if Mr Miliband's wind plan comes in, we'll have locked in higher energy for decades to come. We reckon sensibly we could cut £165 per annum off everybody's electricity bill. But it's in the area of population explosion, it's in the area of mass migration where perhaps we can help a lot. A move towards net zero population increase through migration would ease pressure on rents. It would ease pressure on house price affordability. And we will commit to the biggest building programme of genuinely affordable housing in this country that has ever been seen. Our young people deserve nothing less. So look, we will cut spending. We will encourage growth and entrepreneurship. We want to cut taxes, of course we do. But we understand substantial tax cuts, given the dire state of debt and our finances, are not realistic at this current moment in time. There are some relatively modest things we would do. We would immediately remove IHT from family farms and from family-run businesses. And we will raise the thresholds at which people start to pay tax to begin the process of getting people out of the 16-hour-a-week working debt trap that so many people find themselves in. The state of the finances, the state of the economy is far, far worse than it was in the run-up to a 2024 general election. But be in no doubt, we are pro-business. Be in no doubt, we want work to be rewarded. Be in no doubt, we will do everything we can to bring back confidence and to bring back a change of culture around work, money and success in this country. And be in no doubt that we will have higher quality people in charge of areas over which they've got knowledge than we've seen in this country for many, many decades. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to take a few questions. The first one is Harry Farley from the BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. Harry Farley from the BBC. A matter of months ago, you were talking about tax cuts worth billions of pounds. Now you say tax cuts at the moment are not realistic. How can people trust you when, just like the other political parties you criticise, you promise something before an election and then reverse it when it looks like it's difficult?
I didn't say we couldn't afford tax cuts. I said we couldn't afford huge tax cuts. And I mentioned a couple of tax cuts right at the end that I think are vital to be put in place very, very early. You talk about responsible. Well, look, we haven't wrecked the economy. You know, we're not the ones with projected government borrowing nearly double what it was before the last general election, with unemployment at a 4-year high, with inflation pushing 4%, and with, frankly, yet another tax-raising budget around the corner that'll further dampen growth. So I would say this to you: we are being mature, we are being sensible, and we are not over-promising. But for us not to take account of the dire state of our public finances, that, I think, would be irresponsible. Do we want to have a smaller state? Yes. Are we going to cut the benefits bill? Yes. Will the civil service be smaller? Yes. Will we get a grip on public sector pensions? Yes. But we can't have massive tax cuts until the markets can see we've at least got these things in hand. Next is Joel Hills from ITV News.
Hello there, Joel Hills from ITV News. You share Richard Tice's concerns about the affordability of public sector pensions. Is your message to teachers, to police officers, to NHS staff, that if they vote reform at the next election, you will cut their pensions?
No, what I said was what we discovered so far through local government, and by the way, you'll be hearing much more about the massive savings we've made through local government out through this country as we come up to the 6-month anniversary of being in charge of 10 of those counties. What we discovered, and this is through, a fairly brief look at the way that the pension funds are run at a county level, is they are paying exorbitant, and I mean exorbitant, fees to the pensions industry, which of course cumulatively over a 25 or 30-year period adds up to a very large chunk of the money, and we believe they're very badly administered. Our ambition is to make sure they save money and deliver better value. And you're going to hear more about this because Richard Tice will be giving a major speech at Bloomberg later this week, which will address this and many other issues. Thank you. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Thank you, Mr. Farage. You are the master of political reinvention. I mean, we've had Brexit Nigel and Trade Union Nigel and Small State Nigel and Nationalisation Nigel. They line up like Barbies on a toy shelf. Today we've got fiscal responsibility, Nigel. Why should we trust that this Nigel Farage survives to and beyond the next general election when stuff gets jettisoned, when priorities change and political winds change?
I haven't jettisoned anything. I believe in pretty much the same sort of things I believed in 30 years ago. The difference to that is I now understand more than I did the role of the state in strategic industries. You know, it's why Richard and I went to Scunthorpe. But if we hadn't gone to Scunthorpe, there would be no primary steel being made in Britain today. Have I adapted over 30 years into believing that the country needs an industrial strategy? Yes. Do I believe that actually, in certain failing industries, you know, a short-term partial nationalisation where, by the way, the bondholders and shareholders get wiped out, it doesn't cost government to do it? Yes. So I think you'll find the shifts and changes that you're looking for quite difficult to find. You know, I believe we have to be a competitive economy. I believe we have to have a hard work culture in this country. And I believe that unless business succeeds, the rest of the country can't succeed. A growing public sector does not make us richer. I think I've believed in that for almost 50 years, actually. Christopher Hope, GB News.
Nigel Farage, just on 2 points you raised there in your speech. You said you would raise the thresholds, that's presumably income tax thresholds. In May, late May this year, you said you'd increase the basic rate threshold from £12,500 to £20,000. Does that still stand? That is the biggest commitment you've made on that area. And secondly, you haven't mentioned the pensions triple lock. You want to cut spending. Surely that is now under threat.
OK, you know, on thresholds, bear in mind that from 1988 until the end of Tony Blair's time in office, 1.5 million people paid 40p or more. 1.5 million people paid top-rate tax. By the end of next year, 8 million people will be paying 40p or more. Just to give you an illustration of the extent to which the state has grown, the extent to which we're managing our economy terribly, the extent to which we've not allowed businesses to go out and thrive and succeed, so dragging everybody in. We will raise thresholds. I cannot tell you what the state of the economy will be as the next general election approaches. If I'm right, and that election comes in 2027, then the economy will be in an even worse state than any of us in this room can even predict. So how can anybody project on pensions or thresholds or any of those things between now and then? What we will do, and what we can do, is to use whatever muscle we've got to fight and urge this government to change direction, to ease the burden on small business, being just one example. And, you know, there are many things that we've said and done over the course of the last year that have led to government and opposition following what we say. So maybe we can change things slightly by debate, by force of reason, by opinion poll strength, although I suspect that with this Chancellor and with this Prime Minister, they're so torn between their old Labour voters going reform and their left-wing voters going for a Polanski, your party, whatever it may be, alliance, that I expect what we'll see more of is a government with no vision that just floats around but then U-turns when it gets the chance. OK, I'm going to go to Sam Merriman from the Mail.
Hi. Is the minimum wage too high? Would reform lower it or scrap it to boost aspiration?
Sorry, say that again.
Is the minimum wage too high? Would reform lower it or scrap it to boost aspiration?
There's an argument the minimum wage is too high for younger workers, particularly given that we've lowered the level at which NIC is paid to £5,000 a year. So do one or the other. Do one or the other. Either lift the cap at which NI is due, or lower the minimum wage for lower workers. But you know what? I'd say this to the Chancellor: do something. Do something. Because for so many young people, that first job, and it can be in a pub or wherever it may be, it's a very, very important part of growing up, becoming part of a working, contributing adult. So I would urge the Chancellor to do one of those two things. Aubrey Allegressi from The Times.
Thank you. Aubrey Allegretti from The Times. I wanted to ask you about your nationalisation policy, which you set out earlier this year. You committed again in July to nationalising half the water industry, and you've talked since about nationalising the steel industry as well. How much would both of those things cost? Can you afford them if you're standing here and telling us about how you're going to be fiscally constrained? And are you signalling to workers that nationalisation is sometimes in the best interests of the taxpayer?
Nationalisation should only be used as an emergency measure. Of that I have no doubt at all. In the case of steel, if something hadn't happened, literally within a couple of days, this country would not be a primary producer of steel, the only major Western country that would not be a primary producer of steel. Now, I have heard in the last week that the government are going to begin to do some energy deals with one or two of the biggest users. But that, of course, is simply attacking the symptom of the problem and not the cause. It's the energy prices that heavy industry can't stand. Water's a different case. That's Thames Water, who have lost all credibility morally and financially. And our plan was, as I say, it wouldn't cost us anything. We'd wipe out the shareholders and look for new partners. OK, Ryan Saby from The Sun.
Thank you. You talk about being pro-business and also pro-worker. Where do you stand on employment rights legislation? Would you scrap it? Would you water it down, especially when business says that the government estimates say it will cost £5 billion?
I said earlier on that government only listens to big business. And can very big business absorb the cost, the increased burden of the Employment Rights Act? Yes, provided it damages their small and medium-sized competitors. And that's the point. The more you regulate, yes, it'll cost big businesses, but if it bankrupts their competitors, that's great, as far as they're concerned. But not as far as the economy is concerned, not as far as choice is concerned, not as far as innovation is concerned. So look, the idea that the employment rights legislation should apply to a company with 3 employees, you have to start asking yourself a question. Who's that good for? Well, it's not good for the company, and it's certainly not good for the worker. And it's why I repeat what I said earlier. This is the most ignored part of the British economy. Those little firms that I'm talking about provide 60% of the jobs in the private sector. It's about time they had a voice in the public domain, and the employment rights legislation will damage them and their employees. And my final question, because I'm not doing hundreds today, I mean, normally I do 25 or whatever, and we have got more press conferences coming, but to show you the sheer levels of balance that we apply here, let's go to Pippa from The Guardian.
Thanks, Mr. Farage. I'll ask the other 25 questions for them, if you like. Can I ask who in mind you have to be Chancellor? Will it be Richard Tice, Zia Youssef, or somebody else entirely? Can I quickly also ask, do you still support PR? You were a big advocate of it for many years, but have seemed to have gone rather quiet on it now. The first past the post looks like it favours you. And to end the questions where we started, are you just doing what you accuse the other parties of, breaking promises in order to join the political mainstream? I'm really interested in that balance that you have to strike between retaining the benefits of insurgency while trying to make yourself look credible on the economy. Thank you.
Well, look, I mean, aspiration, all I ever said was that raising the tax, I want the tax threshold to go to £20,000. I think it's vital for this country we get it there. It's vital that with benefits and getting people back to work, we have incentives. I think that's really, really important. As well as toughening of the rules, it needs the carrot and stick approach. So they were only ever aspirations. And I think what you're seeing today is us being realistic about the state of the economy. Now, look, when it comes to who's the Chancellor going to be, who's the Home Secretary going to be, and all the rest of it, this is a work in progress. Over the course of the summer, Danny Kruger joined us. He's taken on a very specific area for us. Colin Sutton joined us, most famous living cop in Britain. He's taken on a very specific area for us. Vanessa Freight joined us, the toughest living prison governor in the country. She's taken on a very special purpose area for us. And there'll be more announcements in the next couple of weeks of people with expertise. No speculation about defections here. There'll be more expertise coming over the course of the next few weeks. And what I've tried to do really hard this year is to get away from this idea, this criticism, that somehow it's a one-man band. It's not a one-man band. There's a broadening team. They're sitting there in front of you, on the front row, from David Bull to Lee Anderson to Richard Tice to Danny Kruger, and indeed Zia Yusuf as well. And there are others, and there'll be more. And as time goes on, there'll be more and more. And as we develop and build that team, we'll start to give people labels. Right now, we're not ready. But I would hope to think that with all the press conferences that we've done, the speeches we've done over the course of the last few months, that you can see that we are developing thinking, we're developing messaging in a very, very wide range of areas. The next big speech we're doing is it you, Richard? That's Bloomberg on the 5th. Bloomberg speech from Richard Tice on the 5th. Thank you very much indeed.